Hey guys, how are we doing today? My name is Dan, the Jazz Shepherd, as most of you know. Today we're starting a new series on the great Arthur Blakey. He's a Pittsburgh native, which is why I decided to don my Connie Hawkins Pittsburgh Pipers, which was an ABA team. The only basketball Pittsburgh's ever had was in the ABA, and that's a crazy story in itself. This team moved to Minneapolis after 1 year. After they won the championship, moved back to Minneapolis and became the Condors in Pittsburgh, but that's a whole nother issue. Blakey was truly one of the greats in the hard bop era. Words are hard to really express just how impressive and thunderous and powerful a player he was. He's one of those transition guys from the swing era into post-bebop hard bop. And he, in a lot of ways, is hard bop. The school of hard bop pretty much consists of graduates of Blakey's groups. And they're all furious players with chops galore. They all had to work really hard to be in his group. He demanded a lot. He expected more from you than you expected from yourself, which caused you to excel and grow in his groups. Any athlete can tell you, when you play with people better than you, it makes you better. When you play with people who expect you to excel and exceed, it drives you and motivates you to do those things. Blakey is all that. Blakey is all that in spades. He's a character on top of all of it. He had a bad addiction for a long time, and he kind of introduced a lot of other guys in the jazz scene to junk, from what I've been told, what I've read, what I've heard. But I'm going to leave the drugs aside. In my mind, the drugs were pushed into the black neighborhoods to subvert those people. So I don't really put the fault of the blame on anyone doing it. It was a pretty bad place. Black America in the 40s and 50s wasn't a very pleasant environment, and drugs medicate. And so I can't be too critical of people with these addictions. And I don't think it fueled the music as much as some people give it credit, as much as it soothed and calmed some of the hurt and some of the ailments that came from living in white America as a young black male. There was a target on your back at all times, and I don't want to get too off onto that tangent, but it's been a painkiller for millennia, and for the addiction to be so strong in the black neighborhoods, and it was meant to poison and kill these neighborhoods without any question in my mind. And as they were fighting for civil rights, this was a powerful counter motion to subvert and weaken those same neighborhoods at the very same time as they were trying to rise up and find some of their own legacy. Back to Blakey and the music. He starts off with guys like Fletcher Henderson. He even plays in Billy Eckstine's great group, which, as it falls apart. Blakey is such an interesting person in jazz history that he's almost one of the people that define modern jazz. You look at his recordings, a lot of the line between what comes before and what comes after, him and Kenny Clark really changed how drumming was presented to people, and how they presented the grooves, and where they placed the kicks, and how they used the rides. So Clark and Blakey kind of create modern jazz almost by how they transition playing percussion in front of these musicians. And so Blakey, by definition, his stuff, no matter where he's going to be transitioned or playing, it's going to always sound modern because of how modern he presents it. It's an interesting and kind of hard to grasp concept, but Kenny Clark and Art Blakey are very huge in the transition of jazz into the modern sound that we hear in the 50s and into the 60s. It's kind of a who's who in modern jazz when you start to look at the guys that Blakey plays for as a sideman in the early 50s and the late 40s. I'm just going to read off this list of cats. Dexter Gordon, Sonny Stitt, Dizzy Gillespie, Illinois Jacquet, Gene Ammons, Sonny Rollins, Kenny Drew, Zoot Sims, Randy Weston, Elmo Hope, Donald Byrd and the Transition Stuff. It's an incredible list. And most importantly, early Monk and early Miles were shaped greatly by Blakey. These early Blue Note Monk recordings from 50-51, these obviously came out earlier on 10-inch. Blakey's a big part of these sessions, and a lot of people say that Blakey shaped Monk and could play with Monk and was empathetic to Monk better than any other drummer who he ever played with. And he comes back to Monk, you'll see in 57 on that Atlantic recording. But these were really important recordings that didn't get the credit they deserved at the time and didn't sell real well for Blue Note. But over the years, they've been seen more and more as legacy recordings. Most of Monk's early prestige recordings in 51, 52, 53, Blakey's the guy that's fueling this great trio, you know. Blakey really was an important figure in the canon of Thelonious Monk and the development of Monk. Now again, here are Miles Davis early Blue Note recordings. Once again, a big important part of this was Art Blakey. And if you see on this one, Kenny Clark shows up on some of them. So you'll see how those two kind of are modern drumming and really influence all the drummers that were to come after them. Miles is a bit of a babe in the woods at this point as far as I'm concerned. He's a far cry from the great trumpet players of his time, the Dizzy Gillespies and the Clifford Browns. He couldn't hold a candle to those guys, and he's not really developed his signature muted sound that we will hear later. And he's a long ways away, obviously, from his second quintet and the fusion stuff that a lot of people love Miles for so much today. Miles is a guy I need to do an episode on because I got a lot of thoughts on Miles. But again, Blakey's huge in these recordings. A young Hank Mobley, this is originally a 10-inch, I have it on the 12-inch Japanese version. Horace Silver, Doug Watkins, Art Blakey, Hank Mobley. This is right around the time the Jazz Messengers are starting to take shape. Now in 1953, Horace Silver, the great rhythmic, he's chunky, he's grooving. Horace Silver knows how to lay down a solid riff on the piano. And when you put Blakey, new drumming, with that fantastic Horace Silver rhythm, what you end up with is hard bop. And it's got a lot of blues in it. It's got a lot of feel to it. It's got some gospel to it. These recordings from 53, I think some of these might be from 52, are seminal recordings. The Jazz Messengers in their earliest form were Horace Silver and Blakey together. And the members of the Jazz Messenger group over the next 20, 30 years, it's in a lot of ways a who's who of the great jazz players. He, as a sideman, that shows up on this Kenny Drew 10-inch. And it's just one example of many sessions that Blakey shows up on in the early 50s. He shows up in Chicago and does some recordings for the Emercy label. And this is probably his first recording as a leader. It's got the great Joe Gordon on trumpet, G.G. Grice on alto, Bernard Griggs on bass, and Walter Bishop on piano. And Bishop will show up again later with Blakey as well. Joe Gordon doesn't get enough recordings, but he does have this 10-inch on Emercy, which they're from the same era pretty much. And Blakey plays on this as well. Both of these are fantastic 10 inches. You're starting to really hear the change in jazz, and Blakey's the one driving it. Blakey is modern jazz in so many ways. He doesn't even get as much appreciation as he deserves. again, with Kenny Clark, these two guys are really reshaping how we hear jazz. And that's going to lead us into these Birdland recordings, another great 10-inch. And this is pretty much early rendition of the Jazz Messengers, even though it's called the Art Blakey Quintet. You got the great Clifford Brown, who, for my money, is the greatest musician probably to ever play any instrument, because he's so precise without ever sacrificing melody. And virtuosity and melody aren't always commingled. So to hear the great Clifford Brown, who I'm going to do an episode on soon, run through some of these beautiful lyrical lines with such precision, such rhythmic precision as well, but without never forsaking melody, it's fantastic. But you got Horace Silver, Curly Russell, and Lou Donaldson playing with Blakey. Those fantastic Birdland recordings were reissued. That's what we're listening to now, actually. These came out in 1955 or 6 on the 12-inch LP format. The fantastic Blue Note artwork, which is timeless as far as I'm concerned. Beautiful, beautiful graphic design. We're leading now strongly into the LP era, and this is where we're going to start to see the Jazz Messengers form. At this point, Horace Silver decides to go his own way. He takes Doug Watkins on bass and actually Hank Mobley with him. And so Horace Silver's early groups have those guys in them. But Art keeps the Jazz Messenger name. And in 55, they go into the Cafe Bohemia. Watkins is actually still on these ones. So is Mobley. Kenny Dorham's on trumpet, replacing Clifford Brown. So this is what's in 55. And again, Blakey's still a sideman. And that's something that's crazy about Blakey's career. No matter how proficient he became as a leader, he still does side work constantly, especially for his alumnus. He's always going to be like, I'll play for you guys, absolutely. So now we're getting into 56, and Columbia, of all things, gives the great Blakey group a couple of dates. And nice little 6-eye pressing of this. And here we have Donald Byrd now on trumpet, replacing Kenny Dorham. We still got Watkins on bass, Mobley still on the tenor, and of course Silver still on the piano on this one. Yep. So they're still part of the Messengers still have Silver, Watkins, and Mobley in them. So that kind of wraps up the early 50s up into 56. That record I just showed you, it's an anomaly for Columbia. I'm going to pull it out again. This record is number 897 in the Columbia discography. The Columbia 12-inch discography starts at 500. The first 316 records on Columbia have nothing like this. Nothing. This is the equivalent of a record label releasing the Wu-Tang Clan today, or in the 90s, I guess. This was out there, it was militant, it was fast-tempoed, it was aggressive, it was a whole new black experience that white America for the first time was going to get a real look at. Because remember, these small labels, the Blue Notes, the Prestiges, those labels are very regional, and they certainly weren't going to go coast to coast like a Columbia was. So this is a very, very important record, and kudos to Columbia for issuing it. It's a really landmark recording because it's one of the first times hard bop is going to be heard coast to coast. So this is a very important record. If you ever see it, grab it. It's been reissued numerous times, of course, but we're going to jump back into 1957 with Art Blakey on episode 2 of this series. And what Blakey does in 57, pretty landmark stuff. Thanks for watching. I'm the Jazz Shepherd. Please subscribe to my channel. Peace.